Picture this. A child sits alone in their room, giggling and chatting with someone you can't see. At first, it seems innocent. Just an imaginary friend born from their vivid imagination. But then they tell you something chilling. Their friend has a name, a story, and maybe even a connection to something that shouldn't exist in our world.
Are imaginary friends truly the harmless companions of a childhood? Or could they be something more mysterious? Something we adults are no longer able to perceive? Welcome to Zumundous. Let's dive into the world of imaginary friends and the unexplained.
Zumundous.
And welcome to Zumundous Podcast, episode 19. I'm Doolin.
And I'm Keith.
And today we're going to imagine reality. Here's just a little bit. Maybe imagining something is reality. We don't know. But the question that we're going to ask here, and this was actually a question that was brought forth by Chris, our one of our friends, Chris, texted me and said he really wanted us to do an episode on this. And if you are one of our, if you're one of our few listeners and you want us to talk about something, then damn it, we're gonna talk about it.
Heck yeah, send them.
So this one's for Chris, man. But he wanted us to do an episode about the possibility of imaginary friends actually being something more than imaginary. Because we've all seen kids, most like maybe a little girl sitting there having a tea party with an invisible person that, you can't see. And, of course, logic dictates they're just imagining that, and I know when I was a kid, I didn't have an imaginary friend or anything like that. But, my big thing was, action figures, I loved playing with action figures when I was a kid, and I would sit there.
That was our generation.
Yeah. Kind of like Andy from Toy Story, you'd sit there and you'd have these little fantasy adventures with your action figures and stuff. And I did that for a long time, probably longer than I should have. But but the question is, if children are imagining these things and they're having these vivid discussions with them, like sometimes it's just a little bit more than like, okay, you drink some tea now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of weird.
It can get more detailed than that.
Could get more detailed. Sometimes they have like little backstories, or maybe a child will make up stories or stuff about their imaginary friend. Did you didn't have an imaginary friend growing up?
No, I did not. Okay. I had action figures though. That was definitely a staple in our generation.
I feel
Star
like
Wars toys, He-Man.
I love
G.I. Joes.
I love my He-Man toys.
Legos, stuff.
Yeah, so I think we saw it that like it's for whatever reason in some of the research we did, girls are more likely to have imaginary friends
according to the studies.
According to the studies, like a higher percentage of girls had imaginary friends than boys. Now, why is that? I don't know if we're exactly sure, but
I never found a reason for that.
No,
yeah, no. They just said it's just more likely.
Yeah. Well, we uncovered some stories that some people online have shared about either imaginary friends that they had, or maybe a child that they knew had. I don't know if you knew any. Does your daughter have? I mean, she's a little bit past that age now, but
nope.
No. She didn't have an imaginary friend growing up.
No, I don't think I've. I'm trying to think if I've even met a kid who had an imaginary friend. I can't really think of.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we talked about it when we were growing up, but I don't recall anybody like saying, "Oh, I had one" or anything like that I could remember specifically.
But I guess the reason that children have imaginary friends is because like it's when you're that age, the part of your brain that is most associated with creativity, imagination, that's developing and like forming all these new neural pathways and things like that. So that could be a reason. We'll get into the science of it here in just a little bit, but I have a couple of stories here. I'm just gonna read the stories out.
Oh, you're going right off the okay.
Yeah. I'm just gonna read the stories instead of like trying to tell it. I'll just give it verbatim. So these are some grain of salt Reddit stories. People post a lot of nonsense on Reddit, but it leads to questioning. So here's the first one. I have a younger relative who used to talk about her imaginary friend, Miss Mim. Miss Mim looks down on everyone, not because she's arrogant, but because she's always floating high on the ceiling. Miss Mim is always wearing her favorite white dress and holding a big clear towel which is assumed to be like a wedding veil, like it's kind of sheer.
Okay.
Miss Mim's neck is always bent. Miss Mim cries a lot. Miss Mim hates our grandma.
Ooh.
Now, the follow-up was, when we mentioned this to my grandmother, she told us that she had a friend who hanged herself in her wedding dress after her groom left her at the altar. There's another one. My son had an imaginary friend named Board, or Board, Board. I don't know, honestly. I can only ever imagine my son was asking his name and the friend was just saying, I'm bored. Anyway, he met him when we moved to an old house. The friend was unnerving at best. He had, quote, mean cats and lived in the wall. Sometimes he would like Board. Other times he would tell us he was mad at Board because he was being mean to him and not letting him sleep. Sometimes Board would lock the door to his room and let no one in or out. It was freaky stuff. But for the most part, he liked playing outside with him, except when Board would try to get him to play in the road. Fast forward some time later, and we are walking past the cemetery by our house, and he walks in there, points to a circle of trees, I'm talking 5 or so, at least 8-foot tall trees, and says, that's where Board is from. I look between these two trees, and lo and behold, a gravestone is inside, absolutely covered by the trees and vines, but just still barely visible. We moved soon thereafter. Board did not follow. So those are just a couple of stories from Reddit, which, I mean, like I said, grain of salt.
Right.
And actually, I did a deep dive on this. I couldn't really find a lot of credible stories. So
I went on YouTube for the supernatural side of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, so, pretend friends, invisible friends, made up friends, whatever you want to call them, can be several things. It could be a human, like we're talking here. Board sounds like a person. It could be an animal, a ghost, right? Monsters, robots, aliens,
interdimensional beings,
abstract concepts. It's just kind of how they personify, like, or it's not even the right word, but how they come across as kids talk about them.
Manifest.
But they also have to manifest. Thank you. They also, to, like, in the studies that they've done, to say that somebody actually does have an imaginary friend and isn't just playing like, this cup is, hey, I'm the cup. It is that they have to be around for longer than a month.
Right.
And, young children, like in the 2 to 4 range, can't really report that they have an imaginary friend. So they actually talk to the person who's around them the most, usually a caregiver or something like that. So to find out, to even find people who have these is very, it's not the easiest thing.
Right.
And then some people might be embarrassed and not talk about it as they get older or whatever, if they have an imaginary friend. But that being said, the normal part of that, humans are social creatures. It makes sense that a kid would make something up like this. They have a little friend to play with, especially if they're only child or the oldest child. It is more common in the firstborn.
Yeah.
Secondborn has an older
nobody to
sibling.
talk to right there.
Yeah. So they're kind of more engaged, by more people, right? But on the supernatural side of this, if they're not just made up constructs of, natural childhood development, is that this is one kid, I read this thing and they said that, they said every night that this guy comes in and he makes the sign of a cross on their forehead or something like that.
Creepy.
Yeah. Before they go to bed. And when they stay at grandma's house or something like that, they're like, well, that seems kind of weird. And they're talking to the kid about it. And the kid's like, no, yeah, every night, and, they're like, hey, can you describe him? And she ends up describing
Uncle Jack.
No, she ends up describing like her grandfather or great grandfather, like to a T. Like she to the point where they like got pictures of like, hey, is this him? And they're like, yeah, that's the dude basically. And could somebody be playing along? Could it be a fake story? Yeah, of course. But stuff like that was kind of weird where your imaginary friend turns out to be like a ghost of somebody in the family or something crazy.
I don't know, did I, on the old show on Zumundo, did I ever tell you the story about my mother? No, there's a legit story here. No, my mother, this isn't quite, imaginary friend territory, but this was something that really happened. Okay. And I confirmed it with my grandmother when it was alive. So my grandfather, as I knew him when he was alive, was not my biological grandfather. Okay. He was my mother's stepfather. Yeah, and my biological grandfather, my mother's biological father, He died when she was in the cradle.
Okay.
So she never knew him.
Okay.
And then, a couple years later, she remarried my grandfather. But I think there was a point in time, and my mother was she was about 12 years old, and she was, about 12 years old. You kind of go through one of those phases where we all feel a little bit like an outcast at that point in our life, and we want to connect. We want to know that there's somebody out there looking out for us. And she told me that she just wanted to see her real father and talk to him so badly that she prayed and she cried and she fell asleep after crying, like into her pillow. And she had this dream that her father comes into the room, dried her tears and held her and told her, like, I'm here with you. Everything's going to be okay. And, and that's, it's just, it's a dream.
Yeah.
You could argue that it's just, her mind manifested that because that's what she wanted. But where it gets weird and where it gets a little bit crazy is my mother comes out of her bedroom the next morning holding a handkerchief. Like she woke up with it in her hand. And my grandmother looked at my mother and said, where did you get that?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I don't know. I just woke up with it in my hand. And she said, that was your father's favorite handkerchief. Whoa. And I haven't seen it since he died. So
whoa.
I know. So I mean, and that's
a legitimately cool story.
When my mom told me that, I was like, And I waited until I was visiting my grandmother one year, and I asked her about it, and she confirmed it. She said, no, that absolutely happened.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's,
multiverse.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily in the realm, a little bit off topic, but definitely like a story that makes you kind of raise your eyebrow and say, like, maybe children are a little bit more attuned to things that we can't see or hear.
They always say that. I mean, they even do that in, this is kind of cheesy, but in spoiler alert, Predator 2, where he can see the predator and he's like, want some candy? Like the predator's there, like a space alien. But yeah. Well,
there's actually a little bit of science behind this, and I'll go into that a little bit. So a child's brain is highly adaptable and still forming those neural connections that, like, those neural connections that we have now as in our adult lives are very well embedded in our brain. But when you're that young, those things are still connecting. And that some scientists believe that it might allow for a heightened sensitivities to external stimulus that adults just kind of filter out at that point in our life.
Yeah, you kind of become numb to.
Yeah. So a child's brain is dominated by
intuition and stuff.
Yeah. Well, a child's brain is dominated by theta waves, which is responsible for creativity and daydreaming until about the age of 7. And so that kind of seems to blur the lines between imagination and reality, making children more open to experiencing things that adults might dismiss or might not be able to see. So there's actually a little bit of science behind
waves
that.
Out there,
yeah. And then there's some research out there that indicates that infants and young children actually view the world differently than we do. Like, and it's hard to think about, but like, can you think back to like, what was your first memory?
I don't know. I've tried to, and I don't know.
So I have my first memories, and I think
my memory's all
it's
weird,
like at the point where you're like, because you don't really develop a memory until you're a couple years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I my first memory is walking around in the house, and I just remember like play out of the house, and I remember I had my bedroom had this picture of an angel like above the window and stuff, and it was just like looking at that before I went to sleep. It was like it's actually a really classic painting where there's like two children going over like a damaged bridge, but there's like an angel watching over them and everything. And I always felt that really comforting. Like, okay. but that's like one of the first things that I can remember when, your memory kind of comes online. But, children might actually have a different perception of the world than we do. And we just can't recall that because our memories aren't really online yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure I remember stuff from when I was pretty little, but I don't know what was first or second or, things like that. I just remember like places and things.
Yeah. Places, things, maybe faces, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there's research and theories out there that indicate that they're more sensitive to ultraviolet light than adults. And due to those differences in lens composition, they can potentially see things outside the visible spectrum that we can't see.
So you're saying like IR or UV?
Yeah, UV.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're more susceptible.
I'd
They're
say
more
like
sensitive to
a
that.
dog, their vision sits closer to the IR spectrum than ours, so they see better at night. That could be a thing,
Well, I mean, and I have some. I'm gonna come back to that.
So they're literally viewing the world differently than we are.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna come back to that a little bit because I actually have another story that happened. That's actually not too long ago in my adult life. This happened, but I'll come back to that.
Well, a lot of like these friends can be developed as well. Not necessarily the extra sensory stuff, but the it's part of normal cognitive development, and it helps people process. Problem solve and like social interactions and like if a kid has a dilemma and a problem, he or she can look at their, imaginary friend, and sort of work through things.
Yeah. Kind of working things out.
Like naturally, oh, this makes the most sense. We'll do that. And kind of, they can also serve as, sort of like the moral, like right and wrong, like, hey, do the right thing. And it's associated actually a lot with positive, like positive self-talk.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you can do this. If you had an imaginary friend, I guess you're more prone to positive self-thoughts than, negative, like, oh, I'm not good enough, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's not like an escapism thing. Excuse me. It doesn't seem to be like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'll hang out with my imaginary friend, everybody else is lame.
Yeah.
It seems to be more like hey, this is going well in life, let's keep doing good and better. And then they also have an imaginary friend. That's what it's been associated with in some of the studies, which is kind of cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Well, this is a clip. I'm gonna go ahead and play it here. This is a clip from a video that kind of went viral about 4 years ago.
Freaky stuff.
If you're watching on YouTube, then I'll put the video up there for you to see it. If you are listening on the platform, then you'll just get the audio. But so this is the way this works is there's a woman takes her young daughter, like this is a toddler, to her mother's grave, so her grandmother's grave, basically, to visit. And this little girl seems to be waving and talking to someone at the gravesite that isn't there. And this thing went viral about 4 years ago, I think, when it first hit the internet. And I remember seeing it thinking like, wow, that's really freaky. So I'm going to go ahead and play the clip here. So here it is.
What are you waving at her?
Bye, kids. Bye-bye. Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye. Oh, what's that?
See, now she's very clearly waving and pointing at someone, like a very specific spot, like not off in the distance. Like she's pointing like right in front of her and waving bye-bye.
Yeah.
At her grandmother's gravesite.
Which is kind of weird. Like, yeah, it's very weird. I know there's some noise in the background, so I don't know if there's cars probably.
Yeah, there's probably cars driving by and stuff.
Trucks. I don't know if there's an airplane or something that she's waving at, or a bird, because you can't see it from the video.
Right.
But trying to put some other spin on it. But she's definitely standing there right on the grave, literally, and waving goodbye. And then it looks like she starts looking up, like,
yeah, well,
bye-bye,
yeah,
like,
bye-bye. Almost like whatever it is like floating away or something. It is weird. But on to that note, I have kind of my own story that it doesn't go off the path as much as my previous one did. But this is actually something that happened to me. Oh gosh, actually, I should say happened around me. Well, it's because it was with the people I lived with at the time. But this is going back about 2012. Maybe,
okay,
kind of in that area.
Quite a time. Quite a long time.
So at the time, I was living up in North Carolina with my ex-wife and my stepson, and my ex-wife and I were together at the time. And we lived in this house. I think you went there like one time, I think, for my wedding. We lived in this house up in North Carolina. Now I never experienced anything really strange there. My ex-wife started to get like really heavy into spiritualism and things like right before we split. And she said she started to experience some strange things in the house. Like, for instance, she was at one point in time, she was in the shower and like the water went really cold and she had like razors, like, for shaving up there. And then they just started popping off of the shower and falling on the floor, which is really weird. And there was some other things too. Like, we had a cat and the cat would be, just looking at nothing with her head moving around quite a bit. And I did see that. And then, my stepson at the time, he had to be probably about 5 or 6 years old. But he started telling us stories about how the cat was watching dancing lights in his room at night. Like there was lights dancing around in the room. And of course we kind of just chalked that off to, just kids, kid was dreaming, kid was imagining something,
Okay.
or he was playing pretend, whatever. Cause kid played pretend a lot. But then he started to talk about the dog that would come out of the floor. And we were like, what are you talking about? The dog came out of the floor. He's like, we had 2 dogs living with us in the house at the time. We had a husky and a beagle, and the beagle was mine. The beagle's name was Mojo. And he said it was a dog that looked like Mojo, but it wasn't Mojo. It's uglier than Mojo. Like almost like it's scary looking. Like it's a scary looking version of my dog.
A scary beagle?
Yeah, but it would come up out of the floor, he said.
Okay.
Which was weird. Now, but once again, we didn't really think anything of that until it was sometime later. And my ex-wife's sister was there in the house visiting us, and her daughter was with us, and Aiden, my stepson, was not there. He was off visiting his father, and so while he was gone, we let her sleep in Aiden's room, and my ex-wife's niece was probably maybe about 4 years old at the time, and she came downstairs in the morning, and she said, "Where's the other dog?" And we were like, What are you talking about? Where's the other dog? She's like, the one that looks like Mojo, but not Mojo. But the thing is like, Aiden wasn't there to tell her about that.
Right.
Like, they didn't talk about that
Weird.
in advance. So I'm like, okay, now you have 2 kids that have seen the creepy dog in the house that apparently comes up out of the floor.
That's weird.
So yeah. So I mean, I didn't have any real explanation for that, but a little bit of a follow-up story to that. Before I left that house, my beagle Mojo, she sadly passed away. She got old. It happens.
Yeah.
But I called home. I called my parents to tell them, like, hey, I got some bad news. Mojo passed away. We buried her in the backyard. And my mom just kind of was like in stunned silence for a minute. And I was like, Mom, I'm okay. Like, I'm sad, but I'm okay. And she goes, no, you don't. It's weird. She said, last night, your dad was walking down the hall past your old bedroom, and in like his peripheral, he saw Mojo laying on the bed. And for a split second, he walked past the door because he didn't think anything of it because he was so used to Mojo being there for so many years.
Yeah.
But then he took a couple steps, like, wait a minute, what the hell? And then when he went and looked back, there was nothing in the room.
Naturally.
But yeah, but he said, like, he was like, I know I saw that dog in the room. But it was the night before she died.
Oh, that's wild.
And it was crazy, man. But I mean, it just begs the question, like, was there some sort of like spiritual link in that house that the kids could see that we couldn't?
Maybe.
I don't know. Kind of wild to think about, man.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Where you want to?
But if children can see beyond our sensory perception, does that have new implications for like how we perceive the universe and the things beyond it? Maybe we just kind of learn to filter those things out as we get older.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, what do you think? Are imaginary friends simply the product of a child's wild imagination, natural phase in their development, or could they be glimpses into something far stranger? From scientific theories about a child's heightened perception to eerie stories that defy explanation, the line between imagination and the unknown remains blurred.
Maybe it's not so much that children outgrow their imaginary friends, but rather they leave behind the ability to see what might truly be there. Thank you for joining us on Zumundous. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep an open mind. You never know who or what might be watching. I'm Doolin.
And I'm Keith.
We'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us.
It's pretty freaky.
That is some creepy stuff, dude.
Yeah.